Don and Steve plus Hallie died today. We're talking about you're still a good mom. And oh my goodness, Hallie, though my kids are grown, it's kind of like, okay, do you remember if you were in college or if you had something that maybe you do theater? In college, I always still occasionally have the dream about like not canceling a class. And I'm going into the last day, it's the exam, and I haven't shown up all
Yes.
semester
Yeah.
and I'm totally freaked out. That's kind of how I remember motherhood of my small children because they're all adults now. But you still have those freak out moments. And did
Yes.
I do, Lord, everything that I should have? Obviously, you're going to come up with the answer no, but you're in the middle of this and you have had to learn what it looks like to surrender motherhood. And I would love to know how the Lord met you to say, you're going to have to surrender this to me.
Man, I mean, that would need a whole book in and of itself. And honestly, like, this book was written I don't have a huge platform. I don't, like, I've always loved to write, but I didn't necessarily think, "Let me go out here and write a book." I dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome on that. But this book was written in our little coat closet, which we lovingly like to call Narnia because you can't actually like close yourself in there, which is unfortunate as a mom of littles. But we just turned it into a little office, and a lot of the book was written there in like 20-minute increments because I needed to know it. It was things that I needed to sort through. That's how the intro got written one night on my phone, on like my notes app, just something that I wish someone would say to me, and needing to know what is a good mom from the author of goodness himself. But I will say, like, to answer your question of how he met me there were so many times I quit this book because when you have a mom failure, when you just feel so riddled with mom guilt or unworthy or just, I don't, what can I possibly tell someone, even on your best days? I would just audibly be like, I'm out. I quit. I'm not working on it anymore. Obviously, he didn't let me because here we are, because he's so gracious and he is faithful even when I'm not. But what I really look back on, I do not have all these things down in the book. That will be something that I'm constantly working on in surrender and new ways in motherhood, as long as I'm here on earth. But I do live with a freedom and a rest that I did not have before I wrestled these concepts in this book. And now in my season of motherhood, we were talking about before we got started, that looks a lot more like discipleship and getting kids here and there and, a little bit bigger kid problems. Um, I am able to rest in the capacity that I have. Whereas, I would feel like, man, did I handle that conversation right? Did I prepare them for this? And now I'm just like, okay, you knew we would be here. You knew this is the capacity I would have. You gave me these limitations. You give us what we need, both me and my children. And I'm able to rest and surrender in that. And that has been a huge blessing to me in my life.
I can just imagine about every mom listening to that saying, "Wait, rest, freedom,
Yeah.
surrender? I want that." How did you learn to let go of some of those things? How did you learn to rest in what God has shown you?
Think that's why every chapter of this book was so needed and took so much wrestling because if you say, "Hey, can we biblically define what a good mom is?" It's a little bit like saying, "Hey, Don and Steve, can you teach me how to abide?" And y'all being like, "Okay, well, step 1 this, step 2 this, step 3." And then even if I could meet all of those steps with excellence, which probably not, let's be honest, but even if I could, have you really taught me the essence of remaining in him? Or have we just prepared ourselves with a little bit more self-sufficiency? And so that's what's so hard about defining what a good mom is. But what I love about this book and what I pray that it does for moms is takes you through this seemingly elusive concept of surrender through what it looks like to let go of trying to be the fun mom, trying to be the strong mom who always has it together, the perfect mom, whatever that looks like, letting go of being their end all be all. Look at what it looks like to actually speak truth, which also means speaking grace and the gospel into your life. what does it look like to accept the compassion of the Lord? What does it look like for moms to dream? And so to kind of take you through these different facets that maybe we wouldn't think about, maybe we wouldn't even realize we wrestle with. And so that is what I hope this book does for moms.
Allie, in the process of writing this book, I know you've encountered a lot of story, a lot of folks and what they're sharing with you as being a mom. And what is one thing that might have surprised you, if any, of all the stories that you've heard?
Think it was really surprising to me because, you know, when you start working towards the marketing, which is really, really early in the publishing process, and you have to define, really, even in the book proposal, like who is your reader. Obviously, most of the book is written with anecdotes to the younger mom because that's all I knew when I was writing. But because it's not a how-to parenting book and it's really addressing the worth of a mom biblically, it really can be for any ages, but that's not marketing's favorite answer, you know, like, they like to have, like, a niche and to really market it towards a group, but it was surprising to me to have a lot of older readers that have grandkids say, "I needed to hear these things." And I realized how much more weighty those feelings can be when your kids are grown to look back retrospectively and say, I can't go back and fix it. So did I do enough? And it's been such a kindness to hear older readers say that it spoke to them.
That's cool. And I would imagine for a lot of older readers who do have grandkids that they have the opportunity to, in a sense, have a second chance with, that there's a ton of encouragement here. But you're living it right now as you're raising your kids.
Yes.
And as you think through maybe different aspects of your motherhood, was there an area that God really seemed to say, all right, Hallie, here's an area that we're going to focus on a lot, and I'm going to show you. You're smiling. You're you're grinning right here. What was that area?
So, okay, the 2 chapters that I wrestled with the most in writing were chapters 5 and 6, and 5 is talking about our lack and limitation. So, it really camps on mom guilt because mom guilt always stares at what you lack and what you aren't. It never highlights, "Look at these things you did well today." It never points that out. It's always staring at the things that you didn't do well or don't even have that gift, you know, like every mom is going to have different gifts and things they bring to the table. um and then chapter 6 was about it's about repentance and repair, so repenting with the Lord and repairing with your children, so it's about when you fail. And when I say I could not stop writing that into chapter 5 because it just was so showing to me personally, but I think I'm probably not the only one, that I think being limited is failure, but it's actually not. Because when you go back to Genesis, and he created this and it was good, and he created this and it was good, and then he created man and woman, it was very good. But when after they've sinned, and in chapter 3, when they hide in shame, as we still do to this day, and they hear the sound of God walking in the garden, which how cool is that? And he says, "Where are you?" And Adam says, "Well, we heard the sound of you walking in the garden and we hid because we're naked." Well, that's so interesting that he alludes his shame to the fact that he was naked because he was lacking clothing when God deemed him very good. But I think oftentimes we come into contact with our limitations when we have failed. And the first question that God actually asks him before going into the consequences, which we rightly have when we fail, is, "Who told you that?" And so I think sometimes we need the reminder that we always needed a God even before we needed a savior. And so the best days of motherhood are meant to be dependent on Him all the time. It's the opposite of reaching out of permissible trees to the forbidden fruit.
Oh, Hallie, we're so dependent on him, and yet we forget that often, especially when they're in the throes of motherhood. Add in social media, and we've got a perfect disaster, a perfect storm. What are you finding from mamas, and even in your own story, that social media is doing to their hearts and minds?
I think that with social media, you have this effect like in one 10, 20-minute scroll, which doesn't take long to happen. Um, you are gathering this log of all these different moms, all these different homes, all these different methods, and they can be great. Like it can be people being honest about the mess of motherhood. It can be people like giving you, hey, here's this Easter devotion idea, like good things. But at the end of that scroll, what you've logged is this whole list of things that you need to do to be a good mom. When in actuality, the Easter Devo mom isn't doing the crafts that this mom was doing. And this craft mom is not making these homemade goodies that this mom is doing. And all those things are good. But just like having the wherewithal of knowing, let me just do what the Lord's asking me to do. And I think that is the essence of remaining in Him, is saying, how would you have me lead my children in this season? How would you, Lord, what do we need to do this sport? Do we need to go to that school? What do you have for us? And I've really learned to pray, whether it's social media, whether it's big decisions, to say, Lord, guide our hands in every facet, because we don't know the future. I don't know what my husband needs. I don't know my children. I don't know what I need. Only you do. So would you just guide our steps and establish them in the way you would have us go? And if we start to go in a way that maybe isn't bad, but it's not meant for us, just close that door. And so, really, to shift that focus back of, hey, these are great ideas, but what does He have for me as a mom?
That's a great perspective, and I think you diagnose something that a lot of us, men or women, moms or dads, may wrestle with and struggle with there. And so, as you began to pray that prayer, Lord, what do you have for me? What do you have for our family? And let go of the others. What did God start showing you?
I mean, that is where that rest comes from, because really, honestly, so you would think that I learned that in the writing of the book, and there was a lot of surrender. When our motherhood is surrendered to the one who never fails, it looks a lot less like striving and a lot more like resting in Him, because He has good plans with or without us, and we get to partner with Him. That changes it to enjoyment instead of the weightiness we often feel in parenthood. But I think it was really when I started the publishing process and fighting, like wrestling with those imposter syndromes, that um, the acquisitions editor prayed over me in a meeting. Would you just guide Hallie's hands in every single facet? And that really spoke to me, because I'm like, why am I so stressed? I wouldn't even have this book deal if it weren't for him. I mean, even the way that happened was crazy. And so, why do I think all of a sudden everything's on me? And I begin to pray that. And we made big decisions this year. We made decisions on moving in town, but where to live, which is, as you know, having older children, like your neighborhood, that matters, where your kids go to school, that matters. And my husband had a job switch. I mean, we had big decisions, but we were able to rest. And if this door opened and He allowed us to walk through, then He knew we'd be here, no matter what hardship we encounter on the other side.
He does. He knows us better than we know ourselves, which is so hard to wrap your mind around. And you keep saying rest, and to rest in that truth, because we want to fix and we want to model and we want to do. And I don't mean model like strike a pose. I mean model like model well for our
Yeah.
kids, or even our community. But that quickly becomes striving. And Hallie, I know you've learned to rest. You've heard other stories. As you've heard those stories, can you share one with us where someone has said, Hallie, I've walked through this journey with you, maybe, adjacent with you, and I've learned to rest, or I'm still fighting it? Like, what are you hearing from others?
I can think of a podcast we recorded this past week with one of my best friends, Emily, and we really talked about rest. And Emily has got her PhD in marriage and family counseling. She's just very smart and wise, lives that out. She's a wonderful mom. I mean, she just balances all these areas so well. And so we often talk about, how can we rest? I mean, she has a lot, she manages a lot of people, and just sees every single person in her life. She's one of those people that she doesn't miss the person because she has all these tasks. And so we talk about rest a lot. And so she was on the podcast, and we were just kind of talking about how, and same thing with my partner here at the podcast, Lindsay Stagg. We were talking about how in every other area, if to someone who doesn't feel comfortable doing public speaking, hey, would you come share your testimony, or would you come talk to the youth about this, or whatever that looks like, you might not be excited about that, and you might go like, oh, I really don't want to do this. That's not something I'm good at. How can the Lord use it? But ultimately, you'd probably be obedient to that because you know He has a purpose if He's asking you to do it. And we often think things like, if one person needs to hear this, then I want to be obedient, which is an excellent perspective to have. But we don't do that about rest. We want to know what the purpose is, what the meaning is, what the effect is before we do it. But that's not how obedience works. And so rest is something that I think in motherhood, I can think of one specific instance where I left and my youngest was a baby, and that felt wild and crazy to leave my husband with all three, not because he's not 100% capable, but like, what kind of mom does that? Like leaves and has some time with her friend for herself for a weekend when, three small kids. And that a lot of that has to do with how we model rest for other moms. And we talk about that in the chapter of rest, but with every mile I drove, it was see my friend 3 hours away. Every mile I drove, I was like, man, I feel like a failure that I'm leaving, but I kept going. And I remember having the thoughts in that season more so than now that, okay, well, if I'm going to rest, I'm going to take this time away from my family. I'm going to come back feeling really refreshed. Like I'm going to really make it worth it. Well, what we do there is we make our rest work because it has to have this outcome in order for it to be worth it. That's not what we see biblically. We see it commanded, we see it be unhurried, inefficient time. And that is really uncomfortable to moms and in our culture. And so I would challenge people to think after having those conversations that you mentioned with friends, like to think about, okay, in every other area when I'm commanded something, I obey without knowing what the outcome is, sometimes with never knowing. And we have to create rhythms of rest with that same mentality because He commanded us. And we will see the effect, but without the hurry of wanting to see that immediately and without making it work.
There are some of us who hear that and say, oh man, that sounds really, really good. And I live at such a pace that I don't know how I could ever make that happen.
Yeah.
I want that, but I've got the kids, the job, the ministry responsibilities, the all the things that we're doing, and they're probably all good things.
Hmm.
So how did you learn to rest in the midst of all the busyness of young motherhood and all the other responsibilities that you have on your plate?
Yeah, and that is like such a good point because there are moms listening that are single moms, and it does not look like leaving the kids with your husband or maybe even grandparents. I mean, and one income, it's hard to find childcare. And so I want to be respectful that everyone does not have the same opportunities. I also want to challenge everyone to really ask, is that true? Is there really no margin in my day where I cannot? Because oftentimes, what do? We sit down and we scroll for 45 minutes and then think, why did I do that? And so, what I often challenge people to do is look at your schedule, whether that's 2 weeks from now, and schedule something that sounds restful to you. If that's strolling in and out of little shops, if that's going to read a book, if it's going for a hike, I mean, there's a lot of different ways people can define Sabbath for themselves, but to cease your work and spend time with the Lord, just enjoying something and being grateful, schedule it. Because I think when you're not used to resting, and I will be relearning this for the rest of my life because every season looks different, but when you're not used to it, it is going to feel like failure at first. It is. It's going to feel like you're doing something wrong and you're taking time. And that's where we have to learn to speak that truth and that gospel to ourselves. But I do find that when young moms, especially, will schedule it and say, this is my rest and I'm doing this out of obedience because Jesus Himself did this and He was more needed than I was. Um, then when we schedule it and go, that feels a lot less like failure than when we just fall into it. When it's just okay, well, I had these few minutes. Well, now I feel bad that I didn't do the laundry. But when we can have the mindset of I'm setting aside this time for this, I don't know why, but that just shifts something for us and we're able to be unhurried because that's our goal.
My goodness. There's so many things because again, my kids are older, but I now have the next generation of young moms that are in my life that are fearful over these things. And as I listen to what you're saying, even in my season of life and thinking about learning that rest, learning what it means to truly, we use the terminology, lean into the Lord, sit with Him. That's a new rhythm. Then I think of the mom guilt, which I'm not sure ever leaves you, even if your children get older. Is have you found so far in what the Lord has been teaching you, Hallie, that the rest is the antidote to the mom guilt?
I really do because even going back to where you were saying, Steve, about not every season looks like that. I think when we set intentional time to rest and we create that rhythm where it doesn't feel so much like failure in our culture, that begins to reshape the way we see it. But I think it also shapes when you're working and when you're going. You're able to realize that rest isn't just pausing, and we should pause because he talks about that, but it's also resting in him as we go, as we make big decisions and as we serve in our churches and as we do the things set before us, we rest in Him. And I really do think those things are connected. At least they have been for me. I feel like I can see, the correlation, and that rhythm has kind of set into my bones and less being just a concept into my mind. And so that's been super helpful.
So, as God has really been showing you and has shown you a lot through the writing of this book and teaching you to rest, what's He been teaching and showing you lately?
Oh, man, just that my capacity is what it is. Because and the funny thing about capacity and limitations is they change daily. 8 a.m. capacity, Hallie, is different than 8 p.m. capacity, Hallie. Like I have a much less at that point in my day because we're tired and we've been mentally on all the tasks all day, or whatever that looks like, or you're just wanting to be present with, whoever's in your house, whether that's a spouse or your kids. And I think that right now, like balancing marketing with the book, and also like I speak at churches whenever I can. And so, there will be like, there was an event, a conference that I was speaking at the same week that my kids were starting school, which meant I'm practicing my talk and they're home, and I'm pausing my time to go peel an apple and then going back and trying to remember where I was. And that used to would have stressed me out so bad. And I'm not saying it's smooth or that I just totally have this down, but there is a rest in realizing you knew I would be here. I am not in charge of the outcome. I am just the messenger. And it's the same for motherhood as it is for a podcast, as it is for sharing your story. It's I am the messenger. The only thing we can control in our walks of faith as Christians and in motherhood is the input. And the input is our faithfulness. And so when we do that, he holds the outcome. He has the outcome with our children, with our work. And the last chapter really hits on that, talking about the three servants and the talents, of how we don't really know how the first two servants did. The first one we were given a little bit of how he got his return. The second one we really weren't. And so we see that God is not a God of micromanaging. He's a very personal God, and he's a God of details. But he wants to see us flourish. That's his goal. And so he isn't putting these things as stumbling blocks. He is there to help us. We can trust him. He is good. And as we walk in motherhood, to realize, hey, your kids are going to do some things, choose some things that you didn't wish. But why should that mean you're not a good mom? Because a good mom is one who faithfully seeks the Lord, and that's the only thing we can control.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so true. And thinking about being a good mom, following the Lord, what you're sharing with us today, Hallie, reminds me that it becomes a trust issue. Like we are giving as unto the Lord, even in our parenthood. So if we're giving to honor Him, that's impacting our families. And then we're trusting Him with that outcome. But you're saying, show up, be present, surrender. And as you've worked through that, what does rest look like for Hallie Dye right now?
Like fun rest or resting as I go?
Well, maybe either because like fun rest, you're talking about hiking and things like that. But if the Lord's saying, okay, Hallie, this is rest today,
Mhm.
what is kind of common for you?
Well, I'll give you an example of kind of the restful state of being with my family. There's a whole story that really well. There's two chapters. There's chapter 2 that talks about kind of wanting to be the fun mom, and there's a story that I talk about in that that really impacted me. And then we talk about in chapter 11 playing house. And I think a lot of times between playing house as kids and living house, we forget the play. And, like, there are seasons of life where it's survival mode, and it's not all when you have toddlers. I mean, there are plenty of ways that survival mode come in, and they're real, and I wanna validate that, but every season isn't survival mode. And so learning to say, "How can I play and enjoy and laugh and dance?" And one of the things and talking this out with my friends that we've come to realize is I think a lot of that is the question of my worth. If you are a task gal and you are like, I know that I am good at getting these tasks done and I am keeping a clean house or cooking dinner or keeping everybody's schedule, whatever that looks like, that you feel like you can serve your family well, a lot of times it'll be we'll find ourselves at war with being able to rest or play with our kids or just be present. Because if you feel like your worth is your work, when you lay that down, you feel kind of worthless. You feel kind of like, what do I have to offer? And so you can be at war. And so when I've been able to kind of wrestle that concept and realize, no, the gospel says my worth is that it is no longer I who lives, but Christ who lives in me. I have his righteousness. I have his worth. Then I am able to have the same worth when I am just killing it that day or when I'm just pausing and resting. And that has actually transformed the way that I can rest in a messy house, be with the kids, whether it's talking Pokemon cards or whether I'm getting to just read my book the way something I want to do, not my book, but, my Kindle,
Yeah, yeah.
Yep,
and
yep.
that's maybe not restful, but,
Still
um,
editing.
that's hilarious, but, either or, that has really impacted realizing, like, why do I struggle to sit here and rest? And realizing, "Okay, let me speak truth to that, and let me just be present."
So good. And by the way, Hallie's book is entitled You're Still a Good Mom, Motherhood Surrendered to the One Who Never Fails, even when you feel that you have. And we're going to link you to Hallie's book in the show notes. So hope you'll check that out. You can also check out the podcast Saltworks. She is one of the hosts on that and founder of Saltworks Ministries. But Hallie, thank you for taking a little time out of your day and joining us and being our plus one today.
Thank you so much. I have really enjoyed spending the morning with y'all.
Well, again, the title of the book, You're Still a Good Mom. And we're linking you to that in the show notes, as well as to Raphael's coffee, Raphael's Roastery, making sure that the coffee in the studio keeps flowing and keeping us going, and appreciate their partnership. Hope you'll check them out. Hope you'll like and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you've connected with us if you've not done so yet, and that you'll be our plus one next time.